Okay, most of what we're going to talk about this semester, as far as Native American people groups, are going to come from the Eastern Woodland area. Okay, it'll be later in the semester, and then next semester where you'll start talking about. So most of the French and British explorers, except for very few, are going to encounter groups like the Algonquin and the Iroquois, the Mohicans and the Seneca, and then further south the Shawnee, the Cherokee, the Chickaw, the Creek, the Catawba, and the Choctaw. Most of these are the tribes that are from here in this region in the south. But the Spanish explorers are going to wind up further south, down central Mexico, in the Caribbean, in South America. And so what's going to happen is they're going to find a different cultural group than you would find in the Eastern Woodland areas. Okay, most of these, let me get my clicker working here. Most of these, especially where the Aztec are going to be referred to as the Mexica. The Aztec are merely the ruling class that controls the Mexica, the people who surround it. Now, I want to give you a couple of the major tribal units that you are probably familiar with their names, but I'll show you some archaeology and stuff from their people groups. Now, the first is the Mayans. Okay, the Mayans come into prominence around 300 BC. They replace an older group, possibly one of the oldest Neolithic groups in the region called the Olmec. If you're familiar with the Olmec, is you've seen those statues of the giant heads. Those are called the Olmec heads. The Olmec are going to be from around the Yucatan Peninsula. The Maya's going to replace them. Okay, many textbooks talk about the mystery of what happened to the Olmec. I believe the Olmec were just absorbed into Mayan culture. Much of what we see with the Olmec and the Mayan look similar, and I would say that the Olmec were just absorbed into this cultural group. Okay. The one unique thing we know about the Mayans is that they are, out of all of these people groups, have a written language. It's still pretty much a mystery to us, but it is in fact a written language. They also have a calendar, and it's a very accurate agricultural calendar, I guess, right up until you get to the very end where it says the whole universe is going to blow up and unravel. That part of the calendar wasn't really accurate. The thing about the Mayans have a mathematics during their time period better than 12th century Europe. Okay, when the Mayans are, so it's simply the technologies are different. Okay, they don't have the kind of metal technologies. They don't have the gunpowder. They don't have the other kinds of technologies that the Europeans have the advantage of. However, their learning, their science, their understanding of architecture and everything is such that they're able to produce monumental structures. Okay, this is the region where the Mayans are. This is really the Olmec territory. I want to show you there in the Yucatan Peninsula. I'm going to show you pictures of 3 different places. The first is Tulum, the second is Chichen Itza, sort of what we believe the Mayan capital, and then Uxmal there on the interior. The Yucatan is a popular destination place, and all of these ruins, if you take a tour of the Yucatan, you will probably be offered tours through these ruins, and I would recommend that you go. This is the Mayan capital in Chichen Itza. It's probably the palace complex. It's a very large structure. multiple stories, and it's still around. Right? It's still around. All of this stuff was abandoned following the Spanish conquest, and after hundreds of years, it just disappeared. Nobody knew about it. You can see other buildings in the background. There's buildings all around the region. This is the pyramid complex, the Great Temple Stair, the Warriors Pyramid, other pyramids in the area. Okay, this is it used to be you used to be able to climb up to the top of the Great Pyramid. You're not able to do that anymore. But the idea that the Europeans brought architecture and things to these people is just ludicrous, simply because they had all of this architectural skill before the Europeans, well before the Europeans arrived. Let's see. This is Tulum. This is the coastal city. This is a sort of a temple building. It's got an alleyway that leads up to it, and on either side of this alleyway are 2- and 3-story buildings leading up to this sort of centralized complex. It is again right on the coast. I never noticed it, but there's looks like a school teacher taking kids through. I got this picture offline. It was somebody's, I guess they used to call it Flickr, a Flickr page, where you would post your pictures from your vacation. And I really didn't notice because there's some couple down on the beach making out. I made sure it was PG before I put it in my PowerPoint. So if you go to the Yucatan Peninsula, you can go and look through all these areas and things. And of course, on the interior is Uxmal, again, Central Pyramid, possibly where the religious practices. And then on either side of the alleyway leading towards this are 2- and 3-story buildings. Again, on either side. Mine were a well-developed, well-governed civilization. As a matter of fact, when the Spanish first arrived, the Mayans are able to avoid the initial enslavement that some of the other tribal peoples aren't, because they're able, because of their written language, I guess, and their skills, they're able to learn to communicate quickly with these Spaniards as they show up. Now, let's see. Another thing, around 200 BC on further north in central Mexico, there's a group of people called the Totexican. They occupy this rainforest, very, very rich, fertile farmlands. Their primary city, which we named Totexican, served as a religious center and a center of commerce for all the people who lived in the surrounding areas. Okay, lots of pyramid structures. The pyramid, they've got 2 great pyramids within their boundaries. The first is the pyramid to the sun, and then on the other side of the Way of the Dead, the pyramid to the moon. The pyramids here are larger in volume than the pyramids in Egypt. They are monumental structures. Okay, it's just they're more gradual. They are more gradual than the pyramids in Egypt. But this central city had a population of around 125,000 people. Okay, the royalty and the priests would live in the center part of the city, and then around this center part of the cities were sort of the barrios, the quarters where the farmers and everyone else lived around the city. As you can see, these pyramid structures, it's believed that on top of each of these pyramids there was always fires going. It doesn't appear that they were doing any kind of a human sacrifice or anything like that. The remnants of what was in the pyramid doesn't seem to betray human remains. But you have to imagine, for a population of 125,000 people, it's going to take a lot to do whatever their religious cultus was. Again, you've got the pyramid to the sun. I don't have a picture of it, but on the other side of the way there is a smaller pyramid called the pyramid to the moon. Really, really pristine architecture. Nice stuff if you can ever get there to see it. The Toltec, around 700 AD, the Toltec are going to invade into central Mexico and conquer the Totonacan. Okay, so the Toltec are going to control central Mexico from about 700 to about 1100 AD. They are a group of northern Mexican nomads who make their way south into central Mexico. They unite under a very powerful leader, and which is how they're able to conquer as much territory as they were, and then they settle in these regions. Okay, they will destroy the Totonacan, at least all of their government systems and everything, and usually it's believed that they enslave the people and force them to labor to build their capital city of Tola. Okay, these guys are not as architecturally adept as the Totecans were, but what's going to happen is they are still going to attempt to copy their sort of structures. They're going to be smaller scale and not as well made. The Toltecs will eventually be replaced by the Aztec starting around 1100. The Aztec southern nomadic barbarians are going to make their way north and invade into the Toltec territory. After the Aztec conquers the Toltec, the Aztec are going to sort of adopt the Toltec as their ancestors in their warrior stories, because they admired the Toltec because of their prowess in warfare. Okay, the Aztec viewed them as heroes, great leaders, and so the Aztec will sort of adopt them as their progenitors. Around 1300, the Aztec will completely overcome the Toltec, and they will be in complete control of central Mexico and all of its surrounding areas. Okay, this is some of the ruins from Tulum, the Toltec city. Again, as I said, not as breathtaking as the other cultures. You can see the person standing there, give you some scope of some idea of the scope of the size. Again, not as ornate, not as fancy as the others. Now, Aztec rule in Mexico. The Aztec will rule central Mexico from 1300 to about 1500. 1500 is around the time that the Spanish arrived. Okay, they go from being barbarians in the southern parts of Mexico to ruling over millions of people, and they rule over them with fear and intimidation. Okay, they will adopt most Mesoamerican cultural identities, except they'll attempt to make them their own. Okay, the capital city for the Aztec will be Tenochtitlan. Tenochtitlan is actually modern day Mexico City. There is a back when the History Channel used to do history things, they had a Modern Marvels, was engineering wonders of the world. They had the Aztec building of Tenochtitlan. They created an artificial island in the middle of a lake to build this city, and it was just miraculous. It was an amazing piece of engineering that they were able to accomplish this feat. But this is today. You can still go to Mexico City, and right in the middle of Mexico City, you will find the ruins of the ancient Aztecs right there in the city. Okay, they were basically militaristic. They didn't have a written language, however, they documented their history and their conquest and their stories through pictures, not like hieroglyphics, more like I guess more like graphic novels, more like we would call them comic books. They refer to these as the codices, is what the Spanish will call them. The Spanish will pore over these books of pictures to attempt to understand the Aztec in an effort to conquer them, in an effort to control them better. Basically, the way their society was structured, they had an emperor, The officers of the emperor sort of served kind of like feudal lords. You don't want to draw too many parallels between medieval feudalism and these guys. Then you had a warrior class of individuals. Then you had the free people who did whatever kind of work, whether they were carpenters or weavers or whatever. And then you had serfs. These serfs were the ones who worked the farmland, right? That worked for these feudal lords in all these different areas. And then the last group in the Aztec rule were the slaves. Slaves, when slaves no longer were useful, slaves would be the individuals that would be offered up in the human sacrifice. Okay? I like these pictures because in the foreground you can see ancient Aztec construction, and then right behind it you can see 15th century Spanish construction. Okay? In other parts of the city you can look from the ancient world to the Middle Ages all the way to the modern world. Yeah, right here, right. So you've got the great temple stairs going up to the temple pyramid for the Aztec, and then right behind it you've got high-rise buildings there in the same location. Which again, if you have a chance to go to Mexico City and visit any of these places, I would heartily recommend it. The Aztec did practice human sacrifice, as you'll read about in your text. It was something that was a daily sacrifice that had to be adhered to. The website I would show you, but it's been taken down, so I don't know where they've moved it to. But it was a really nice website of the archaeology of the region. Now, in South America, primary people group are the Inca. Okay, around 1200 to 1532, the Inca are going to control this area of South America. It starts in a city up in the Andes, in the valleys of the Andes Mountains, called Cusco. I know. You're thinking of Cusco as the Emperor's New Groove. Well, that's where the story's about. The story is about this, and the first emperor of the Incan Empire was named Cusco. Okay? The Inca will build roads that are going to unify all of these spread out villages and make it possible for these villages to communicate and to trade and to do commerce back and forth. The Inca had no written language, but the remarkable complexity of the way that they operated their government system is really quite impressive as far as these people are. Some of the buildings and structures are so high up in the Andes Mountains that the Spanish never were able to find them. They couldn't go to those altitudes. Matter of fact, the Inca would talk about the great palace in the clouds, Machu Picchu. The Spanish believed they were talking about heaven, some notion of heaven, until 1921 rolls around, when an airplane is flying over the Andes Mountains and they spot the ruins of Machu Picchu, which, again, so high up in the Andes Mountains that the Spanish were never able to even make it up there. Okay. The extent of the Incan Empire, by the time the Spanish arrive, the Incan Empire covers all of Chile, part of Argentina, Bolivia, goes all the way through the Andes Mountains, all the way through Peru, and up even hinting into Colombia, right there into Ecuador, hinting up into Colombia. The Incan Empire was longer than the Roman Empire ever was wide. This is a massive, massive empire. And for a people who didn't have a written language system, the way that they were able to maintain order and taxation and actually food distribution was really, really quite remarkable. Okay, not only were they technically, scientifically astute enough to have a good calendar, this is a sundial. They can actually tell time. They use this sundial to tell time. You can tell how high it is up in the Andes Mountains, looking at the clouds scraping the tops of the mountains. They worked with gold and different precious metals and stones. And again, there's a nice picture of Machu Picchu way up in the Andes Mountains. There's some people there. You can see it again to get some scope, so you can see the size of this place. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Now, Incan government society, each of the villages were controlled by the clans, the family units of these villages. Each village would have 2 to 4 different clans, families, that would run the village operations, usually led by the most able man in the whole group, and this would become their leader. They owed taxes to the city of Cusco, and from these taxes, foodstuffs and things like that, Cusco would show a very early concern for a social welfare system. They would hand out foodstuffs. They would make sure that villages that did not have a good harvest would be able to harvest their crops, or would be able to feed their people. Okay, you have to imagine, it's hard enough to farm at an elevation of 14,000 feet above sea level, but you can imagine that in a bad season, there's many times when this centralized government would have to render assistance and distribute the food to all these other places. They also demonstrated a very, very clear care for the destitute and the elderly folks in their society. The Incan Empire was really, really quite impressive. Now, those are the primary civilizations in South America, in the Caribbean, in central Mexico. There are others, but these are the most successful. These are the big ones. These are the ones you've heard about all through the years when you talk about these peoples. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to discussing European exploration, and then Portuguese and the Spanish exploration as we get into the second chapter. Okay, very good.